So the natural resilience method is what I didn't realise I created back in 2001, which is when I did my round the world trip. And I'm going to take you through each of these in turn. And it's not just a random set of steps. It's based on NLP and performance psychology, a lot of science and neuroscience, 20 years of research perfecting, and a little bit of woo, because I'm also a yoga and a meditation teacher, and sometimes that demystified ancient wisdom is the little bit of magic that unlocks something when nothing has previously worked. So step one is pressing pause. Now this is the step that's often missed when we're doing inner change work and we're working on our habits, and the natural resilience method focuses on that habits pillar. That pressing pause. You can't change your life when you're exhausted, overwhelmed, and stuck in the fight, flight, freeze response. So if you've got a team member coming to you and they're absolutely wired and stressed and worried and anxious, there is no point in sitting there saying, oh, but think about what your solutions might be and what you could do differently, because it's not going to go in. The filters in their brain in that moment are hardwired for self-preservation. So you have to help them press pause on the fight, flight, freeze response first. And the brilliant news is they don't have to turn their legs into a pretzel and go and hide in a cave for a month. You can do it in just 60 seconds. Step two is rewiring your brain, because our thought habits are stored in our neural pathways, but so are the filters through which we see the world. So we spend a lot of time thinking the same thoughts, and the same thoughts, same story, different actors very often. These thought habits, particularly if they're accompanied by a strong emotion, get hardwired as shortcuts in the brain. So somebody can come along and say something in a certain tone of voice that just reminds you of when somebody else said it in that tone of voice, and it fires off the whole cascade of responses as though you were back in that stress situation. So in a working environment, one of the really, really common things I see, particularly in women, is they've previously had a toxic boss. And that toxic boss will have had mannerisms, phrases, tones of voice, that as soon as anybody in their future world uses anything like that, takes them straight back to that trauma. Lots of micro traumas, and there's a lot of brilliant work being done at the moment in the field of complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So those habits can go back a long way, but the brilliant thing is you can actually rewire your brain in just a few minutes a day, in as little as 1, 2, or 3 weeks. The third step is rewiring the body. Now this is often the missing link in when we're doing this deeper work. The body gets addicted to the cortisol and the adrenaline that we're running on when we're in chronic stress, worry, and beating ourselves up. If you rewire your thought habits, so you do some mindset work without having cleared the body's memory, then it's just like dandelions, yeah? It's just going to come back up through the pavement. So one of the things that we do on my deeper programs is we actually work with the vagus nerve, which science is now catching up with what people have known for a few thousand years, has a very direct impact on the body's addiction to adrenaline and also what I call mind story drama. By knowing how to reset the vagus nerve, you can almost instantly reset the body's stress response. And it's not the kind of work you can do as a line manager unless you've had the proper training. And the more somebody has pushed on through the fear and pushed down those emotions, the more likely it is that actually they've got really strong body habits and body memories and muscle memories that mean that those buttons can be pressed and it fires off the body's chain reaction as well as the brain's. And one of the things I often say to clients is that your body feels every thought you think. So that's why we need to do the mindset work, but then go that next layer deeper with the body work. This is also where you would be, if you've been through the full formal certification, you'd be working with people on helping them to feel safe. Because imposter syndrome, when they're self-sabotaging, they're doing that because they don't feel safe. And feeling safe has to start in the body. Because when you're doing mindset work and people want to feel safe, they often actually kind of just dissociate from the present moment, and they're not really present and they're not really here. So that deeper work, helping them to rewire the body to feel safe, to be present, can make an enormous difference, because then they're grounded, and instead of being buffeted anytime anything goes wrong, they've got that grounded natural resilience. So they don't need to claw themselves back from the edge with mental toughness. They're not knocked by things anywhere near as much, full stop. And that's really the essence of this with the natural resilience method. Step 4 is then looking at personal power. It's almost always the case when someone's running imposter syndrome that they will have been giving away their power or feeling like they're the victims and they don't have control. There's often an element of people pleasing. So one of our models is the 4 Ps of imposter syndrome. That is perfectionism, procrastination, project paralysis, and people pleasing. They're very common coping strategies. So it's reclaiming your personal power, resetting toxic boundaries, learning how to deal with energy vampires. Does everybody know what I mean by energy vampires? Those people you get off a call and you're like, well, they look great, but I'm exhausted, yeah? And it's about stepping into really having more impact, making that difference, actually speaking up with their ideas, standing in their personal power, but without the fight, flight, freeze, fight bit, which causes conflict. It's important to be able to reset these toxic boundaries, but without going into the resentment trap. Because often when we realise that our boundaries have been a bit toxic or we've given away our power, we can feel quite cross about it. So that's why this is this deeper work. Step 5, which is about becoming the real you. And often if you've worked with a coach or done a personal development training course, you'll often find, what do you want is actually step 1. It's right there at the beginning. The reason we have it as step 5 is right there at the beginning. You've got this massive imposter syndrome gap running for somebody. They're using the bridge of coping strategies. What do you want needs to be within the box that we call safe. So it's going to be quite limited. And what they really want, but maybe are scared to ask for, could feel terrifying, and they're going to self-sabotage it. But when you've been around that circuit and you've cleared out a lot of this stuff, becoming the real you, consciously creating your future, deciding what impact you want to have, how you want to express that. Can you imagine? It's like a much bigger version of you that you're making those decisions from. And the decisions will excite you rather than petrify you, which makes a very big difference on self-sabotage. And then this process is designed to be a wheel that you go round as many times as you need to, because some of this deeper identity work is actually big stuff. But people can work through this at the what we call the beginner level, the newbie level, then the next level, then they can get to the ninja level. So each time they're doing techniques that work a bit more deeply at the speed that that person needs. So if you're watching this and you're a line manager or a business leader, when you're working with people on this, it would be very much at that first few levels, because you probably don't have a psychological contract with that person to get into therapeutic work in the workplace. But if you're fully and deeply trained on this, you can help people to go through to those deeper levels. But people can pause wherever they need to, spend some time consciously creating their future. If, for example, they're doing our Imposter Syndrome Bootcamp program, which teaches them this process, it's actually designed for them to go through that course 3 times. Each time a layer deeper, so that you're creating inner change, if you're on the course, at a speed that is right for you. One of the things that we would often do, for example, at stage 5, that is about setting yourself free from things like busyness and those 4 Ps, so the perfectionism, procrastination, project paralysis, and people pleasing. It's about really saying, these are things I don't want to take into my future. How do I want to show up in the world? If I were going to choose some of my inner characteristics and qualities, which ones do I want to feed and which ones do I want to release? So that they're able to feel safe to take off the masks and the armor and that changing how they show up so they can be more of who they really are. And the brilliant thing is when you have somebody in the team that's doing this work, or you have a client doing this work, is it starts to become a bit contagious. Suddenly everybody starts to feel a bit safer. And if you've got particularly, say, a line manager or a leader with a big team working for them, we had a client recently who's one of our practitioners, natural resilience method practitioners. She was working with a line manager in her organisation who had basically become toxic because she'd been promoted, imposter syndrome had kicked off, and within 6 sessions, she had shifted so much that her team had turned from toxic to thriving, because the changes she was making changed how she showed up, how she was communicating, how the team worked together. So it really is possible to truly set yourself free from this, and the ripple effect is huge.